Welcome to Nurses with Voices, the podcast where we amplify the voices of nurses everywhere. I'm your host, Dr. Lindra James, DNP-RN, and I am thrilled to go on this podcast journey with you. As a nurse with over 20-something years of experience, I've witnessed the dedication, resilience, and passion that defines our profession. Through this podcast, we aim to educate, empower, and inspire nurses at every stage of their careers. Whether you're a novice nurse navigating the challenges of bedside care, an experienced clinician looking to advance in your field, or dreaming of becoming a nurse entrepreneur, Nurses with Voices is here for you. Join me as we delve into topics such as advancing in nursing, mastering leadership skills, and fostering a supportive community within our profession. Together, we'll explore the triumphs, struggles, and countless opportunities that come with being a nurse. So tune in, subscribe, and let your voice be heard, because here at Nurses with Voices, every nurse has a story worth sharing, and every nurse voice deserves to be amplified. Welcome back to another episode of Nurses with Voices. I'm your host, Dr. Lindra James, DNP-RN. And today I have Julia Michelle here. And Julia is the founder, right, of Julia Michelle Agency. And they specialize in brand voice. And this is when I spoke with Julia, this was so intriguing to me, and it's very true. You need to be able to identify your voice and what that means. But I'm going to let Julia share her story and tell, she's the expert in this area. So I'm going to let her talk about what brand voicing is. And, so go ahead, Julia, tell the listeners, what it means and what inspired you to develop this company.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm happy to be here. It was really interesting, just in our initial call, kind of seeing a couple of things come through. So I'm really excited to talk more about brand voice. And I'm an RN as well. I have a background in a few different things, emergency room nursing, travel nursing, telehealth nursing. And I started my business back in 2020. Gosh, it's a while ago now. Started it as a copywriter and was working mostly with mental health professionals, therapists, things like that, which was, right kind of in the middle of the pandemic, which was an interesting time to get into that. But have since evolved to realize that the piece that I really enjoy the most is helping people really develop their brand voice. So helping people, especially professionals like nurses who get into entrepreneurship, it's such a different world where you're not the employee anymore. You're actually the founder, the CEO, you're the face of the company, you're the person who's really building this, and having the opportunity to develop how you want your business to come across and the voice that you want to use, what you want to say and how you want to say it is something that we're not really taught in nursing school. And it's not something that's really, in my experience, very well taught to entrepreneurs either, where we're kind of given this general sense of, well, you have to create a personal brand to stand out. Just be yourself, just be authentic, follow these templates, but also do your own thing. And it's just this whole mishmash of not really very helpful advice in terms of how to develop your brand voice. And what people run into is, especially, I kind of got into this a bit sideways in that copywriting is essentially marketing, but a lot of people, nurses in particular, have businesses that aren't marketing focused. And so then having to do the marketing for your company, having to figure out what to write and how to say it, it's really overwhelming. And it's often something that people want to delegate to someone else. Maybe not immediately, obviously they start doing it themselves, but as they grow, it's definitely on the list of things that they want to bring on, a marketing team or bring on a copywriter. But when you've built a business from the foundation of yourself, it's really hard to articulate and to actually delegate your writing so that someone else can sound like you, So we run into this problem where people aren't given great instruction in terms of how to develop their voice in the first place. And then they're given even less instruction about how to effectively delegate that so that they can scale in a way that still lets them remain true to the brand that they've built. So that's the really cool part about brand voice, is being able to measure things and help people really develop it, document it, and delegate it.
I think that's a great point. And I think you make a great point because I can remember starting my wellness business. And one of the things that I wanted to delegate was my social media. Right.
Yeah.
So, and I think we may have touched on this, but that was one of the things I wanted to delegate. But I was finding that the person that was doing my social media, she didn't sound like me. Right.
Yes.
And she didn't sound like me. And, and there were just, and to your point, maybe I didn't give her the best direction. It was it was a piece of the business that, I thought was pretty, simple, but every piece matters, right? Every piece matters. And so when I would get different scripts and captions that she would send, and I would say like, can we edit that? Because, and she, and, it got to the point where, listen, I want this to be, my wellness business is fun for me. It's fun. When I say fun, it's because it's helping people. It's about preventive care. I don't need the stress part that come from the social media aspect of it, and I want this to be something that you enjoy doing as well. And if you don't, then maybe you're not the person to be able to, put this part of the business out for me. So it's just exciting that you're able to help people to understand what that means and to have that brand voice. Tell me, how do you think your background in healthcare helps to influence your ability to help people identify their brand voice?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, one of the reasons that I was so excited to come on this podcast is I think working with nurses in particular is such a passion of mine, of helping nurses be heard, because in healthcare, we're not really heard. And in our businesses, we have an opportunity to be heard in a way that, we don't necessarily have in the healthcare space right now. And it's something where, because that's not really a muscle that we use in healthcare, it's hard to kind of step into that. But I think it's really been kind of that experience of not feeling like I really had a voice that has strongly influenced me to focus on this really niche area of business. I don't do visual branding. I don't do the copywriting piece anymore. I really specifically help people find their voice. And that has been such a, like you said, having fun in your business. That's been such an enjoyable piece for me, is to work with clients and have them go through, the process that I have and come out the other side going like, oh my gosh, this is like finally how I want it to sound, right? This is what I want to say. And that's so empowering. And it's really, we hear all the stuff around the importance of having a personal brand and the importance of standing out and being unique and having your own perspective and blah, blah, blah. But the kind of prevailing view of just like, well, be authentic. It's so unhelpful.
What does that mean, right?
Yes.
Like, what does that mean?
So it's kind of the blending, and we talk about this in nursing of, how it's kind of an art and a science, right? Where there's that like intuition, there's kind of that gut feeling that you get sometimes, but you have to be able to explain that. You have to be able to articulate that to someone, right? Of saying, what I'm seeing is this problem and this problem, this problem, which is why I'm worried. And with brand voice, so much of the conversation around it that I see is really geared towards kind of the intuition of it. And, it doesn't sound right, or it has to be you, or, it just has to like feel like, and it's so, I mean, it's true. There is an intuitive hit, like you experienced with your social media, right? Of you're like, that doesn't sound right. And that's an intuitive response, right? You automatically know it's not right. But what's more helpful for both you and any team members that you bring on is to actually be able to articulate that and say, okay, this doesn't sound right because you're using the wrong language. The words that you've chosen aren't the words that I would choose. Or to say the words were right, but the sentence length is off. I write in longer sentences, or I write in shorter sentences. but being able to articulate what it is about it that's giving you that intuition, that's what lets you scale. Because you can't very well just delegate to someone and have them read your mind, as nice as that would be. So we really have to find a way to measure, to bring that scientific piece in to your brand voice and to articulating it and documenting it so that you can either better understand how to write for yourself or have a tool to be able to delegate it to a team.
Right. No, I love it. You're absolutely right. I think in my case, there was a few different variables too, because to your point, the communication piece is huge, right? It's huge. And if, everything can't be done through email, right? And text, and that drives me crazy, right? So when it comes to certain things, we really have to be able to pick up the phone and have a conversation. And I think when I talk about variables in my situation is a little unique. However, to your point, communication, I always find, is so key to almost any area of communication, and especially in having a voice. And I like how you mentioned that, nurses with voices kind of, it's kind of in sync with what you're talking about with brand voicing, right? And giving yourself a voice, because more often than not, that's a lot of what I hear nurses say, that they don't feel heard, right? Hence nurses with voices. So I love being able to bring, nurses onto the show to talk about what they're doing. And because it's all about it's all a part of communication. And whether you're in healthcare or whether you're in business, you have to be able to communicate effectively, and brand voices help you do that. I wonder, in such a crowded market, right? Trying to get people to understand what brand voices is, and like, how do you help business owners, articulate effectively what that brand voice is?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's something that I didn't know was a thing until I was a few years into business. But it's so helpful to be able to differentiate it, because again, branding, personal brand, all of that is often talked about. And what they mean by it is, the colors of your brand and the logo and the pictures that you're taking for your brand. And that's all great. And those are absolutely valid things to invest in and to be really, intentional about how you're presenting yourself. But the piece that often just gets dropped is the words, right? Like, what are you writing to go along with all of these beautiful things that you've put together? And that is the piece that is your brand voice. And it's so interesting. I just did a session with a client this morning, and we went through all of the, different tone words and her kind of interpretations and the meaning that she takes on them. And every time I do these calls with people, it's so interesting to me how just like we go through one word at a time, and each word has such a different meaning for each client that I talk with. And so the idea that, a brand voice guide can hand you 3 adjectives and a list of, 5 words that you don't use, it's so simplistic, and it's never going to be practically helpful, either for you or for any team members that you bring on. I looked back not that long ago. I had paid for someone to create a branding guide for me, not when I first started, but maybe a year into my business. I was like, got to have a personal brand, got to get this dialed in. And I was looking back at the guide that she gave me, and, bless her, I'm sure this was the best that she knew how to do. But my brand voice guide, the voice section of that says things like, oh, well, Julia's brand is between timeless and modern. And it's like, what does that even mean? That's not going to help me. That's certainly not going to help a copywriter that I bring on. Like, imagine getting handed that as your assignment and saying, write something that's between timeless and modern. It's like, that's not even anything. So with the system that I use now, I call it brand voice biometrics, because it's really similar to what we see with like heartbeats or fingerprints or people's, eye scan. Like, these are identifiable features that are unique to you, But the thing is that they have to be measurable for them to be useful. And the way that I look at your brand voice is to look at 4 things. And we look at the words that you use, like the language, the tones that you use, which is something that I help them sort through on the session, like the one that I had today, the cadence, so the length of your sentences, the kind of flow, the rhythm of your writing, and the style. So things like, how do you use ellipses, or do you use brackets? Do you use italics? How do you use bolding? And all of those things are so interesting because we intuitively know it, and we know it when we see it, and we know it when we hear it. We can identify, most of the brands that we follow, right? Like if you get emails from someone every day, you could identify an email from them by their voice. You can identify someone's website by their voice. But what we're not great at doing is articulating those things and going, what is it about it? But when we are handed something that's off, we know it. And so people often don't think, that they have a style, or that they're very particular about their words or about their tones, until you hand them something that's wrong and they go like, oh my God, no, that's absolutely not me. And that's where the magic happens. And that's when we get to go like, okay, cool. Why not? Right? Like, what is it about that that's wrong? And what is it about it that we can change so that it's the way you want to sound? And bringing those 4 elements into kind of the conversation lets us take it from something where it's just like, well, I guess it doesn't sound right, and we'll just bang our heads against a wall until we can magically, get it right, to, oh, we actually have these 4 things that we can like work through, and we'll get it right.
Gotcha. Yeah, I can remember being in, because I something about me, I'm big on mentorship. So I believe in having a mentor. I mentor, and I can remember early on, and I was at a training, and we were talking about speaking, and we were talking about building your brand, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that the speaker who was giving the seminars mentioned, like, how many, what do you guys think when you think about your brand, right? And people were mentioning logos and colors, and and she goes, well, what about you? You are your brand. And it was almost like half the room, thankfully for me, prior to attending the seminar, I had, but I have to say, and I have to be honest, initially, that's all I knew too. Until, until you become, when you know better, you do better, right? Like until you become more aware, and as you, grow with, personally, professionally, and you realize like, oh yeah, but it was like an aha moment in the room, because people don't think about that. People don't think about how you are your brand, regardless of whether your colors are purple, gold, whatever it is, you're your brand. So that's interesting. Tell me, can you share a success story that you've had with a client, and your brand, with your brand voicing? Like, tell me a success story that you've had, and then on the same note, share a not so success story.
Sure. So the specific brand voice packages that I'm doing, I've only been doing those now for just less than 6 months. So I've got more success stories, thankfully, than non-success stories. But really, the piece that I see happening is, there's a coach that I worked with who, her and I have been friends now for a long time. We started our business around the same time, and we've kind of, been working together. And so I was telling her about this brand voice, and she had just brought on a copywriter to help her with the emails. And she was finding the same thing that you experienced with the social media, where she's like, it's not sounding like me, right? And it's something where when you bring someone on and you delegate a task to them, obviously the reason you're doing that is to make your life easier. Like the hope of this is to take something off your plate. And when you do that, and then it ends up coming back onto your plate, and now you're having to, edit and re-edit and give feedback and just rewrite it yourself, it's really discouraging to go like, why did I even delegate this? And how am I ever going to grow as a business if I have to keep doing all of this myself? And when we did our session together, the brand voice kind of detective session is what I call them, we went through, and what was really fascinating is I have a column in there which lets people put words, tone words that they feel represent them, but they don't necessarily want in their brand. And it's different than what you hear a lot of people saying in the sense of you are your brand, right? Be authentic, be yourself. And all of that is true. But what I've found is that it's really helpful to actually give people an opportunity to say, you know what, this is me, but it's not my brand, or this is my brand, but it's not me. And you can have a little bit of that separation. And what was really interesting for her was seeing things that she was putting in her column of like, this is me, but not my brand. And there were some things where she said, you know, right now, this is only in the me column and it's not in my brand, but I want to bring it in. And there were other things that were in her brand column that she said, you know, I kind of just want to keep that to myself. And so helping her really decide and choose which things do you want to include in your brand? Which things do you want to keep as yourself? Where do you want to have that separation? Where do you want to kind of get louder and lean in? And where do you want to, you know, kind of pull back? Having those things, we can actually look at, you know, how does that affect your language choices? How does that affect the styling that you use in your brand voice? How does that affect the cadence or the length of your sentences, the overall flow of your writing? And to see her put those pieces together and go, oh, like if I want to lean more into the kind of anti-establishment approach of saying, you know, look, so much of what's out there is wrong and I have a better way to do things, which, you know, ironically is a very strong part of my brand voice. You know, there are practical ways that we can do that in terms of the language and the cadence and the styling that you're using. So really helping her see it doesn't have to be something where you just kind of pray to the content gods that it comes out hearing or, you know, sounding the way that you want it to. We can actually tweak it. We can, you know, have something that was sounding maybe a little more wishy-washy, maybe a little more kind of tentative, and we can actually bump up the authority just by changing your language or just by shortening your sentences. And it's something where her seeing that, you know, since we've had that session together, I you know, I follow her on social media, I get her emails, and seeing the content that she's put out from that, it's so fun because you can see the voice that we worked on coming out. And that's just like, it just tickles me.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
So you can see by reading her emails and just by seeing her content, like, yes, she's using the strategies. I love it.
Yeah.
So share with me a time where you know, you didn't have such a successful experience in helping someone to find their brand voice. And I ask that because I'm sure there's a why behind it.
Yeah. I think you know, the ones that I think of, I honestly, they're not that I know that it didn't work as well. It's just that I don't follow them as closely. So I haven't seen the results as immediately.
Okay.
You know, one of them was we did a more in-depth brand voice guide and she was bringing on additional writers and she was starting her own podcast and she was really wanting it to be kind of a broader idea. And, you know, her and I aren't as closely connected. So I haven't seen the results as, you know, kind of obviously pop up, but hers was more of she was working on the foundational pieces behind the scenes before having this big expansion in her business.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So what advice do you have for anyone who is trying to find their brand voice or just really maybe in the beginning stages, or maybe they're not doing so well because of, you know, they don't understand that piece of it?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing is to just know that like there is a way to measure this and there is a way to actually develop this and document it and delegate it. That I think brand voice is often kind of left in the dust in terms of like, oh, well, it's just, you know, either you and your copywriter click or you don't, or, you know, they get it or they don't. And there's so many ways that we can curate that so that they do get it, or so that you get it. And knowing that there's a way around this rather than just like feeling your way through it, I think would be the first thing. And second of all, look at some of those things that I mentioned. On my website, there's some more information about what those, 4 things are: the words, tone, cadence, and style. But even just having that basic framework to go through will really help with understanding how to develop and articulate your voice. So, I think looking at those things to start, and of course, I'm always happy to talk or help and support people.
Hey, great. So tell me, how can people find you if they're looking for someone to help them with their brand voice? Do you offer, packages, programs? Like share with us what you offer, so let them know how to find you.
Yeah, sure. So my website is juliamichelleagency.com. And my email is pretty much the same. It's julia@juliamichelleagency.com. So pretty easy there. And yeah, I offer kind of my signature package that I offer is called Brand Voice Identity. And what I do is get on these 2-hour brand voice detective calls with you. And we start with your tones. So what words best describe the tone of your brand? And why? Because like I said, everyone interprets these words differently. So just handing someone a list of tone words it'll set them kind of on the right track, but it's not going to give them the kind of nuance that you need. So we really go through that in detail. And what that lets us do is essentially reverse engineer those other elements. So once we know the foundational tones that you use, we can actually look at what kind of language supports those tones, right? What's your readability level probably going to be like? Do you write at a more scholarly level? Do you write in a more simplistic level? And what's the cadence that supports that? Are you veering towards more long, kind of flowy, experiential sentences, or do you write in a really short, choppy, kind of, to the point way? We also look at, what's the kind of priority of how you structure your persuasion of, how do you approach things? Are you supporting people's dreams? Are you, gathering with them against their enemies? We look at all of these things, and it helps us form this identity that really determines how you want to present yourself with the words that you're using. And what's really interesting is that a lot of people, once they get clear on their voice, it actually ends up influencing the other things like their logo and their colors, where, it kind of gives them this, there's some noise there. But it gives them this place where they now are so clear on what they're saying and how they're saying it, that they're like, oh, pink was like never my color. This is the direction that we're going in now. And so it's really interesting to see that come through, but it gives such a sense of confidence and of clarity that they can really move forward. So we do that call together. I then write up like a summary of their brand voice identity. So all of the things that we talked about, their tone words, their cadence, their words, and they get a copy of that. We go over it together on a follow-up call and really make sure that it's on point, right? That it is accurate to how they were describing themselves. And that is really useful for them, first of all, but it's also a great starting point for if they're, kind of testing their toe in the water of bringing someone on. It's a really solid place for that person to start and for them to be able to give actionable feedback of, oh, it doesn't sound right because the sentences are too long, or because the word choice was off. So it really helps them. A lot of people are using, we talked about like AI in terms of content creation. And even if you're not hiring a writer, if you're using AI and you get something back that sounds off, if you've gone through the process of developing your brand voice, you'll actually know what to tweak to make it sound right. Instead of just hitting the try again button endlessly.
Very good. Well, there you have it. Just one last question. Who is your target audience? In case we
Great
missed
question.
that, who do you want to contact you?
Yeah. So, in particular, nurses, like I mentioned, I love working with nurses who are in business. Most of the time, there are some people who want to do their brand voice right off the bat and get that kind of as their starting point, which I think is great. But in general, what I like to have is people who have been in business for, kind of around a year. They have something that they know works, that they know people are interested in. And what they're really wanting to nail down is their corner of that industry, of going, what makes me a different wellness coach or a different, whatever their business is. They're really wanting to narrow in on what differentiates them from the rest of the market. And they're wanting to start that scaling up process of delegating their marketing or delegating their content to someone else. And I see so many people who skip the step of developing and documenting their brand voice, go straight to delegating it, and then it's not a great experience.
All right. Well, gotcha. Well, there you have it. Well, thank you so much, Julia, for coming on today. This has been very interesting and enlightening, and I'm sure the listeners will find this valuable as well. So make sure you guys contact Julia Michelle. Until next time, I'll see you in the next episode of Nurses with Voices. So you guys stay educated, stay empowered, and stay inspired. Thanks again, Julia.
Okay, you're welcome. Bye.